Alright, now that we've mastered object mode, we're going to move on to edit mode and modeling. In this chapter, this is where the magic happens. This is where you're going to learn all the tools you need to know in order to basically create anything you want. Now, there's lots of information in this chapter, so just remember to pace yourself and learn a few new things, and then take it upon yourself to practice with the new tools that you learn to understand how they work and what they're useful for. So let's start out by learning how to go into edit mode. With the cube in the middle selected, press the Tab key to go in and out of edit mode. This is what edit mode looks like. You'll notice all the dots on the corners and the orange lines, and everything's highlighted right now because it's all selected. I'm just going to give you a refresher and go over the anatomy of a mesh. All the dots on the corners of the cube, these are called vertices. The line extending between two dots is called an edge. And if you select 3 or 4 connected edges, you'll select what's called a face. So this highlighted area in here is called a face. And this cube has 6 sides, or 6 faces, and a vertex on every corner. And now I'm selecting everything in edit mode the same way that I select things in object mode. I'm simply right-clicking on them, and you'll see everything I right-click on becomes highlighted. And you can hold the Shift key to make multiple selections. So I'm selecting each vertex by hovering over it and right-clicking while I hold Shift. And other selection tools work the same as well, like pressing the A key once or twice to deselect all or select all. You can also use the C key for the circle tool and the scroll wheel to make the circle bigger or smaller. And also the B key for border select. Now, one more selection tool that's very useful is the L key, which selects linked vertices. And what that means is if we hover the mouse over one of the vertices of the cube and press the L key, it selects all the vertices connected to that one vertex under the mouse. Now, it's hard to visualize how this is useful with just a single cube in the scene, but if your mesh is complicated and has lots of objects in it, it's actually a very useful tool. And let me demonstrate that by duplicating this cube a bunch of times. So now we have quite a bit of a mess here. And if we go into wireframe view, well, let's say we want to select all the vertices for the center cube here. We would go into wireframe view and try to select them manually, but there's just so many vertices in the way, it's hard to know what vertex belongs to which cube. So that's where the L key comes in handy. We can simply hover over the one vertex exposed there, press the L key, and there we go. It selects all of the vertices connected to that one vertex. So that's how the L key is useful. Now I'm going to press Ctrl and Z to undo all of that and get back to our default cube. And now I'm going to show you how to do regular transformations on your selection in edit mode. And all the transformations are basically the same as in object mode. If we make a selection, like I'm going to select the top 4 vertices of the cube, and I'm going to press the G key to grab it and move it. And now you can also constrain movement to an axis just like in object mode. So if I press the G key, then the X key, it constrains it to the X-axis, or the Y key for the Y-axis, or the Z key for the Z-axis. And just like in object mode, that also works for rotation and scaling. So you can either press left click to confirm that movement or right click to cancel it. Now with that selection made, I'm going to press the R key to rotate it. And if you press R again, you'll have trackball rotation. And the S key is to scale. Now we can duplicate things in edit mode too by pressing the same hotkey, which is Shift and D. So with the top of that cube selected, I press Shift and D, and it made a duplicate of the top face. We can also select the whole cube and press Shift and D and duplicate the whole cube. Same way. Alright, I'm going to select those and delete them. Now before we move on, I want to make a note of something real quick. When you're in solid shaded view, in the header of the 3D window is an option down here called Limit Selection to Visible. This is enabled by default, and it basically hides everything on the back side of the cube. If we disable that by left-clicking on it, you'll see now we have sort of an X-ray vision, and we can see all the edges and vertices on the back side of the cube. The reason I'm making a note of this is because when it's enabled, it can get confusing sometimes when you're making selections. For example, if I press the B key for border select, and I draw a box over the whole cube like that, I'm automatically and naturally going to think that that now just selected the entire cube. But if you rotate it, you'll see that it didn't select that vertex on the back side. So it can get kind of confusing, because then if I go to move this, there's that vertex staying behind because I didn't select it. So that's why I normally like to work with this disabled, because when I go to make a selection like that, it's going to select all the vertices on the back side of the selection box too. So both of those selection types have their uses, but I prefer to work with that option disabled. Now I'm going to go over a couple of the main tools for modeling. One of them is extruding. This is something you'll be doing all the time, and extruding is basically a way of extending something. So if I were to select the top 4 vertices of the cube, let's zoom out a little bit, and press the E key to extrude it, it basically extends it. It creates an extension. And now let's select the 4 right vertices right there. Press the E key, and now I'm going to extend that to the right. And this also works if you just select one edge by selecting 2 vertices, then press the E key, and just press it a couple times. And it also works for selecting a single vertex. You can press E when you have a vertex selected, and we'll basically just draw a line. And we created a bit of a mess here. I'm going to press Control and Z to undo all of that and get back to our original cube. There we go. Now another way of extruding is, let's go into front view. Instead of pressing the E key, you can simply hold Control. Well, first make sure you have a selection. So again, I'm going to select the top 4 vertices here. And in front view, numpad 1, hold the Control key and simply left click. Now this doesn't extrude it straight. It actually extrudes it kind of along the path that the mouse is taking. So if we continue holding Control and left clicking as we drag the mouse in a circle, it keeps making extrusions based on that path. So this is actually a pretty easy way to make things like rope or wires, because you can just take a circle and extrude it along a path like that. So to recap on that, you press the E key to make a regular extrusion, or hold Control and left click. I'll press Control and Z and undo all of that. Whoops, I ran out of undos. Alright, I'm going to delete that by going back into object mode by pressing Tab, then pressing the X key and selecting delete. And in top view, press Shift and A, and I'm going to add back in another cube. Alright, so the next tool I'm going to teach you is called Subdivide. Subdivide basically just takes something and breaks it into smaller parts. So if we go into edit mode by pressing Tab, with all of the vertices selected, press the W key for the specials menu and select Subdivide. Now you'll see each side of the cube was subdivided. So one of the faces now has become 4 faces. And this edge here along the top corner of the cube, instead of being a single edge, has now split into 2 edges with a vertex in the middle. So that just adds some extra detail to the cube so that we have more to work with and can create different shapes. So again, to subdivide it, make your selection, and you don't have to select everything. Let's say we just select the 3 bottom vertices there, press the W key, and select Subdivide. It adds a vertex in the middle of each one of those edges. Or we can select everything again, press the W key, select subdivide, and we can keep subdividing it and create massive amounts of vertices. I'm going to undo all of that. Let's get back to our regular cube. Alright, there we go. So we've learned how to extrude, we learned how to subdivide. Now let's learn about loop cuts. To create a loop cut, press the Control and R hotkey. You'll see this purple line appear. This is just a guideline that tells you where this loop cut is going to be created. So if you mouse over the top edge here so that we have a vertical cut, and left click, you'll see that it added all of these extra edges. It added a loop of edges, thus the name loop cut. And now we can actually move this within that area. Or you can press right click to keep it centered. Or you could have pressed left click wherever you decided to place it. So now let's make another one right next to it by pressing Control and R, hovering over that edge right there until we have a vertical cut like that, left clicking, and then let's move that close to the edge like that, and left click again. So this is just a more controlled way to kind of subdivide things by adding extra loops, by adding extra edges wherever we decide. So that hotkey again is Control and R, and a purple guideline shows up. Left click on it, and you can move the new edges, and left click to confirm, or you could right click to keep it centered. Alright, so that's how you add extra loops of edges. Now let's learn how to use something called the knife tool. Now the knife tool is just a way to manually cut edges and vertices in a path that you define. So let's go into front view, and let's say we want a diagonal line right here. We want to create an edge that's diagonal on the top corner of this cube. If you press the K key, it creates the knife tool, and you'll see the mouse icon turns into a little knife icon. And if you notice in the 3D header, you have all of these options for the knife tool. The most important one is the end one. It's called cut through. That makes sure it cuts all the way through the cube and not just on the front end. But let's just, for the sake of this example, not choose any of those options yet, and left click in an empty area like that, and then drag that line so that we can create that diagonal edge on the corner of the cube that we wanted. And you can see those little green dots. That's where the vertices are going to be, and there's going to be an edge connecting them both. So if you left click again, you'll see it created that edge, and now you can either continue creating more cuts, or you can press the Enter key to confirm the cut you made. So now we just made a new edge there. But you can see it didn't get cut all the way through. It only made a cut on the front edge of the cube. That's where you needed that option cut through. So if we press Control and Z and go back into front view and press the K key again for the knife tool, and press the Z key for cut through, and make that same cut, press Enter to confirm, and now rotate the view. You can see that that cut now went all the way through. So this was just an introduction to the main modeling tools. You might not understand completely how useful they are right now, or how you'll be using them in your projects, but as we progress during these tutorials, we're going to be using these tools again, and now that you have some basic knowledge on what they do, you'll understand them a lot better once we start to use them. Now we're going to move on to a small modeling project on how to model a bowling pin, and after that we're really going to get our hands dirty and actually create a bigger model of a toon house. So now that we've learned all the different ways that we can subdivide, extrude, and hack up a cube, let's go ahead and put some of the tools to the test by making that bowling pin. Let's press the Tab key to get out of edit mode and into object mode. And with the cube selected, press the X key and delete that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a mesh circle in top view, and we're going to extrude it up and as we're extruding it, we're going to shape out our bowling pin. So let's go into top view by pressing numpad 7, press shift and A for the add menu, and add a mesh circle. Press the tab key to go in edit mode. Now we see all the vertices we're working with. And press numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And what I'm going to do is just simply extrude this all the way up and scale the new extrusions as I go. So press the E key to extrude, and then the Z key to constrain it to the Z axis so it moves straight up. And I'm going to move it up to about there, and then I'm going to left click to confirm that and press the S key to scale it up. Bottom of the pin is kind of fat, and it has a bit of belly to it, and then it gets real skinny on the neck and a little bit bigger at the head. So I scaled that up a little bit, and I left click to confirm. I'm going to press E again, and I'm going to move this straight up. And you don't have to press the Z key to constrain to the Z axis. You can also hold the control key for snapping, and you can move it straight up. I mean, you can move it left and right, but you have more control than just moving it around like this. Or you can just press the Z key to make sure it stays moving straight up and down. So I'm going to extrude that up on the Z axis a little bit more, and I'm going to scale that up more. I'm going to press E again to extrude it, and then Z to constrain it. And I'm going to just extrude that straight up. I'm not going to size it. Press E to extrude, Z to constrain it to the Z axis, move it to about there, and now I'm going to start scaling it down towards the neck of the bowling pin. E, Z, left click, S, scale it in for the neck, E again, scale it in just a tiny bit this time, E, Z, now we're going to start scaling it up, E, Z, scale, you know the drill by now. Now that we're at the top of the bowling pin, we need to zoom into that, and you'll see there's a big gap, there's a hole in it. We want to fill that, and to do that, let's extrude it one more time, but not move it. Let's just, right after that, immediately press S to scale it in, and hold Control, and look at the bottom left of the 3D header, and scale it in until it says 0, 0, 0, and then left click to confirm that. Now all those vertices we just scaled in are in the exact same position, but they're still not one vertex, so we want to connect them all. To do that, we can press the W key, and we can either choose Remove Doubles, which removes anything that's in the same position as something else and kind of connects it to it, or we can select Merge, and in this case, I don't know, let's select Merge, and let's merge them all at the center. So this will merge all of the vertices selected at the center of them all. So now they're all one vertex. Let's go back in front view. Let's move that vertex up just a little bit to round off the top of the bowling pin. Alright, it's not the worst looking bowling pin in the world, but I think the neck's a little bit too low. So what I'm going to do is deselect everything by pressing the A key. Press the B key for border select. I'm going to select the neck there. Rotate the view to make sure they're all selected. Again, this is where this limit to selection would have confused us a little bit. But since I have that disabled, we can make selections from front to back of the object. So anyway, with the neck of the bowling pin selected, press G and then Z to move that up a little. And let's just go through the bowling pin now and start reshaping it to make it look a little bit better. I'm going to select all of these bottom vertices here, move that down a little. I'm going to select the top of the bowling pin, move that down a little. And I think we need a little bit more curvature here. I'm going to scale this up a little, and there's a lot of empty space here. I want to add another loop cut here. So we learned how to add loop cuts by pressing Control and R. And when we see that horizontal pink line, left click. Now we can move this edge loop where we want it. I want to keep it pretty much centered. I'm going to left click there, and now I'm going to scale that in. So we have a bit more of a curve going on there. I think the bottom of the bowling pin is a little bit too fat, so I'm going to select all of that and scale it down. And scale that down a little more. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that shape. Now I'm going to show you real quick one other way of selecting, and that is something called loop select. So instead of using the B key and drawing a box over one of these circles, I can select them by holding the Alt key and right-clicking on one of the edges of the circle. Now that's going to select all the edges selected to the edge that I selected. And you can do it with the vertical edges too. If you hold Alt and right-click on one of the side edges there, you'll see it selected all of the edges connected to that one, going from top to bottom of the bowling pin. So that's an easy way. If we're in front view and we want to quickly select one of the circles so we can resize it, hold Alt, right-click on one of the edges, and then scale it the way you want. Now at the bottom of the bowling pin we still have a hole here too. So I'm going to select the bottom circle, and in front view I'm going to extrude it down a little, just a tiny bit, scale it in so that we can create a little bit of a bevel. Press E again, move it down on the Z-axis, just a tiny bit. Press S again to scale that down a little more. So we have that. And now we can extrude this again and scale it down to 1 point, or we can simply close this off by pressing the F key. And it connects all of those edges with something called an n-gon, which is just a face that includes more than 4 vertices. So we press the F key to create a face between all of those vertices. And now the bottom of the bowling pin is complete, and so is the top, and it's one solid object. Now it's all jagged and faceted, so let's smooth it out by pressing the T key to the side toolbar, and under the shading options press the smooth button. Let's get rid of the toolbar by pressing the T key again. And now it's all smooth, but I mean it's still very low resolution. You can see all of the angles here. It's all kind of jagged. So let's add a subsurf modifier. It should smooth out the whole thing for us. So let's expand this properties window a little bit bigger and go into the wrench icon here. If you click on that, it will take us to the modifiers buttons. And click on the drop down menu and let's select subdivision surface. You can see just by clicking that it's already smoothed it out a lot more. You can smooth it out even by changing the view subdivisions from 1 to 2. Perfect. If you press the Z key to go into wireframe view, you can see how much extra detail that it added. And if you change the view back to 1, you'll see it's a little bit less. You can even change view down to 0. And that's the original. No subdivisions made. So let's leave view at 2 and render at 2. And the difference between these two is the view number is the number of subdivisions that you see in the 3D view here. So that's basically for previewing. The render number is when you press F12 to render your scene, well, the bowling pin in the render is going to have 2 subdivisions. So view is for previewing and render is for the final output. I'm going to press Z again to get back into solid shaded view, and in front view I'm going to go back into edit mode and I'm going to shape things a little bit better until it looks absolutely perfect to me. think it needs to be a bit more fat. Okay, I'm happy with that. So there's our bowling pin. Before we move on, there's a couple more things I want to show you with the bowling pin. So if we go back into edit mode, and let's select one of these circles by holding Alt and right clicking on the edge there. Now say I wanted to move this up. I mean, I could go in front view and I can press the G key and I can move it up. But then I would have to scale it down to keep the same shape of the bowling pin. That's crap. I want something easier than that. So with all of those edges selected, let's press Ctrl and E for the edge menu, and let's select the option Edge Slide. Now this is going to move that edge up and down, but it's going to try to keep the same original shape of the object. You can see following the path of the shape of the bowling pin. So now we can move that up, and it kind of scaled itself inward for us. I don't know why I would want to move the edge there. I mean, this is a poor example of how to use that tool, but we're probably going to be using it later, and I just wanted to give you the heads up that such a tool exists. So this is in the Control and E menu, and it's called Edge Slide. And it will slide your edge up and down for you based on the shape of your object. Alright, the next thing I want to show you is different ways to select parts of a mesh. Like right now we're in vertex select mode. So everything that we select is going to be vertices. However, that's not the only kind of selection that we can make. In the header of the 3D view, there's three options down here. The default option is vertex select, which is what we have on now, and that enables us to select vertices. The option next to that is called edge select. If we left click on that to enable it, the vertices disappear, but we can select all of the lines now. Now we can select all of the edges instead. And the option next to that is called face select. If you left click to enable that, now you have all these dots, and when you click on the dot, you select the face that it accompanies. So those are the three different ways of selecting parts of a mesh. You can even hold the shift key, and let's enable vertex select and hold shift and enable face select. Now we can either select a vertex or a whole face. Each one of these selection modes has their uses, and we'll discover how useful they can be in future projects on this DVD. But for now, I'm going to leave the default, which is vertex select. I'm going to leave that enabled, and we'll move on. Last thing I want to show you on the bowling pin is that, just like with objects, we can hide things. So say we wanted to take a look at the bottom, and just the bottom part of the bowling pin. I'll use the B key to select the top part of the bowling pin, press the H key, and it hides all of those vertices. Now we can work with just the bottom part. And once we're done making any changes that we want to make, press the Alt and H key to reveal all the hidden vertices. So that's just a way of hiding some. If you have a complicated mesh, you can hide the bulk of it so you can work with just one isolated area. It gets rid of the mess and allows you to concentrate on just one small part. The last part of this chapter is going to be about facing. Facing is when we take three or more vertices and face them, or fill them, to make them solid. We'll be using this tool all throughout the DVD. It's one of the most important things to know about mesh modeling. We already worked with this a little when we faced the bottom of the bowling pin. I'll show you how it really works now. We're going to go into edit mode of the cube by pressing tab. And I'm going to select the top four vertices, press X, and delete those vertices. So we're left with just a plane now. I'm going to go into top view, and I'm going to right click on the top right vertex and press E to extrude that. So now we have edges branching off from this plane. Press E again, and press it a few times. Now, let's say I want to close that gap right there between this vertex and that vertex. I can right-click on one, hold Shift, right-click on the other, and press the F key, and it joins those two vertices with an edge. Now we use that same concept for facing. We can select these four vertices here by holding Shift and right-clicking on them all, and then pressing the F key to face them together. And we can do the same with these. Select those four and press F. And you don't have to just select four vertices at a time. We can select these three here and press the F key. And let's make a couple more extrusions. Let's extrude it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Select these two vertices and press F. We can select more than 4 vertices for a face now to create something called an n-gon. So let's select all of these vertices and press the F key. Now that right there is called an n-gon. It's any face that has more than 4 vertices. A face with 4 vertices is called a quad, and a face with 3 vertices is called a triangle. So that's just a little introduction to facing, and we'll be using that in much more useful ways throughout the DVD. But just keep in mind the F key is something you'll be using a lot.